There you go, recording in progress. Okay, Gareth, to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So my name's Gareth Williams. I'm the operations manager at Viridor Credits Environmental Company. I've been with the company about 10 years. I started off as a temp for a couple of weeks and ended up loving what we did so much. I wanted to stay and carry on doing the good work. I've got a presentation which I'll go straight into, but what I'm hoping to get out of today is that all of you will feel confident that you've got a project that you can come to us and complete at least a stage 1 application form to let us have a really good look at it. There is a 2-stage application, but the first one is very simple, and we'll go over that a little bit later as well. So the presentation is a little bit about who Viridor Credits are, why we have a fund, and how you can get your hands on some of that money. So I'm just going to share my screen now with you. So hopefully in a few seconds you'll see a sort of white screen and then eventually a presentation. Okay. So hopefully you're all seeing what I'm seeing there, which is our first slide. So we're Viridor Credits Environmental Company. We are a separate organisation from Viridor, the waste management company. We were established in 2001 to distribute the Landfill Communities Fund contributions from Viridor on behalf of the landfill operator. Like I say, we have our own separate board of trustees, our own memonarts. We are completely separate, and the reason for that is for there to be a degree of separation between Viridor and the projects that are funded. We are based in the southwest, so there's 5 members of staff. We're all based in Somerset, and we all work from home. We closed our office back in October 2020 as a result of the pandemic, but also to save money so we can put more money into communities. And in London specifically, we've been funding there for many, many years. But in the last 3 or 4 years, we've invested about £2 million in grants to about 50 projects, but I would think we can do better than that. And hopefully after today, we will. Just a rough guide to the funding area. That circle is a 10-mile radius from the energy from waste facility in Croydon. So it's very rough, but you can just see Richmond and Twickenham on the left-hand side there, just within, and that is the prescribed funding area for London. Outside of that, if it's not biodiversity, we can't help you, unfortunately. So the Landfill Communities Fund is based on a green tax, which was introduced in 1996. So for every tonne of landfill that goes into a landfill site, there is an ever-increasing tax associated with that. And Viridor and all landfill operators are invited to donate a percentage of that landfill tax liability to a company like Viridor Credits. And we get roughly £1 to £1.5 million a quarter from Viridor. The way it works is that you have to be within 10 miles of an active landfill site, and Viridor will donate, for example, £1 million to Viridor Credits, and they will receive a tax credit back from the HMRC for 90% of the value of their donation. We are regulated by an organisation called Environmental Trust, or Entrust, and every pound that we donate or spend has to be registered with that organisation and overseen by them. So some basic criteria, we've already touched on location. For community and heritage projects, you have to be within that 10-mile radius that we saw earlier. For biodiversity projects, they can be virtually anywhere. You have to have, the applying organisation has to be properly constituted, generally not for profit, and forgive me, not for profit, properly constituted, and can be things like local councils, friends of groups, community centres, and the church as well. Viridor Credits will only fund capital works, so things like revenue funding, things from websites, and bills and salaries are not eligible. Now, I think most of you have come today with a community project in mind. So 3 of the most important things with community projects are access. What we mean by that is how available is your facility to the general public. So the best example I can give is a village hall, which between the hours of 8 and 10 has a window for 14 hours where the general public can book 1 hour, an afternoon, or an entire day. That is full public access. It doesn't have to be the whole day. It can be just the morning. For example, if you have a church where the mornings are taken up with services, but in the afternoon there is a room where you can hire out to the general public, that's okay as well. That's something that the current regulator is very hot on. So we're looking at public access really as a real priority for what we fund. And I think that's something that individually you could talk to me about your own facilities to see if they meet our public access requirements. Ownership, so your organisation, the applicant organisation, has to have either ownership of the facility you're hoping to improve or a 10-year lease on that facility. There's very little room for negotiation there. The only time when a 10-year lease may not be required is where the project is a lower threshold amount. So a £10,000 award may be able to be flexible on your lease, but hard and fast rules are ownership or a 10-year lease. Proven need, that's letters of support from your community. They can be individual letters from community groups or users, or it can be from consultations you've undertaken with your local community. A couple of quick examples of recent examples of community projects in London. On the left of your screen there is West Wickham and Shirley Baptist Church. They had recently installed a ramp with Viridor credits funding to enable the full ground floor to be accessible by people with mobility issues. And slightly different tack on the right hand side is Mortlake Meadow footpath in Richmond, which was a bit of a boggy mess and is now a much smoother ride for all cyclists and walkers, commuters and everyone else. Heritage projects, I think there are a couple of you with heritage projects in mind. So these are specifically for listed or religious structures or amenities, principally churches, but it could be any listed building. Again, ownership is important, and again, proven need, very important. Now, it's important here to disambiguate between a project in a church and a true heritage project. So if, for example, you wanted to put in a servery into your church to enable you to host bigger events more comfortably, that would be a community project. Heritage projects are more focused on the fabric of the building and repairs and that sort of thing. A couple of examples of heritage projects. On the left, we have Bishop's Palace in Fulham, where we helped with a little bit of repointing around some of that medieval brickwork. And it's a bit small to see probably, but that entranceway had been painted numerous times to the extent that there was no detail on the two little faces on either side. That was stripped back, repainted, and is now very lovely. And on the right-hand side, St. Peter's Church in Vauxhall has this quite famous in organist circles old church organ, which was refurbished by Viridor credits. And the final object that we can fund are biodiversity projects, which I don't know if there's anyone here today with a biodiversity project in mind. However, you might have one in the future. So I'm going to go over the British Action Plan Species or Habitat. You need to have a very specific endangered species or habitat in mind. That would be the focus of your project. We need to evidence long-term management for that species or habitat. So we're talking 5 to 10 years of monitoring to ensure that the project is delivering the outcome that you had proposed. And you have to have a partner organisation if you're not already one of the wildlife trusts. So if you're a community group, we would employ the services of London Wildlife Trust to advise you on your management of that site. I could only find one in London recently, which was Wimbledon Common, which was by the Southeast Lakes Rivers Trust rather. Doesn't look like much, but what they've done there is in the river itself, they've put a lot of brush and dead wood in order to create slower and faster running water areas to help invertebrates and fish with laying eggs, and rather than having a straight, fast flowing channel. I think it's easier to start with the things that aren't eligible before we go on to eligibility. So what we can't look at are elements of projects that have already started, and we consider a project to have already started if you've employed the contractor to undertake the works that you're hoping to raise funds for. We don't fund, like I said earlier, any of your revenue costs. We don't fund salaries, bills, rent, anything like that. We don't fund anything to do with multimedia, so we won't fund your website, we won't fund radio shows. We don't fund anything on school grounds, And this is to do with protecting our applicants from changes in your availability of anything that's on a school ground. So if you had a swimming pool at school and it was available to the general public 50% of the time, Viridor credits could only fund potentially 50% of that project. But if then as a school, you wanted to increase that to 60 to 70% school use and 30% community use, the school would have to pay back some of the award that Viridor credits had already given. It's a complicated system that requires an awful lot of monitoring on our part. And so our policy is that anything on school grounds or any other proportional project is ineligible. We no longer fund new builds. As of, I think, last year, we stopped funding new builds due to the complicated and drawn out process that they go through. Some general information. We have 4 deadlines every year. The first one of the financial year is the 30th of April, and then every 3 months from then on to 31st of July, 31st of October, 31st of January. They're the deadlines for the stage 2 application. There is no deadline for stage 1. The meeting dates following those deadlines tend to be 6 to 8 weeks following that deadline, which is when you'll get a decision. In terms of funding limits, nationally, our funding limit is £100,000. In London, it's £50,000 because there is no landfill site in London generating tax for the scheme. There's just the incinerator. There is no tax associated with the incinerators, which would go into our coffers. So in London, it's capped at £50,000. Anyone who's successful with funding will be required to source a contributing third-party payment, which is equal but separate to 10% of the value of your award. So if you were awarded £10,000, you would have to find a sponsor or a series of people who you could fundraise for 10% of the value of that award, which would be £1,000, and that's paid to Viridor. So it's a separate transaction between a third party sourced by the applicant and the landfill operator Viridor, which enables Viridor Credits, the charity, to release the full £10,000 funding to the applicant organisation. Don't worry if you can't get your head around that bit. As many people I've worked with can't either, but that's something just to consider, that you will have to find 10% of the value of any award that you are given from a third party, which is paid to Viridor. Okay, so paperwork required for your stage 1 application. It's my hope, like I said, that 90% of you will be confident enough to submit a stage 1 application either after this meeting or after some one-to-ones next week. You will need to set up an online account with Viridor Credits. It's very simple. It's simply registering your email address and creating a password. That will enable you to manage your applications to Viridor Credits. You can manage multiple applications from one account. You will need an indication of the costs of your project to enable you to give us an idea of how much funding you're looking for. Now, you may already have quotes, that's great, but if you don't, it's worth finding out roughly how much that project is going to cost you. Before your stage 1 application, you will need to have all of your permissions in place. We're talking faculties, planning permission, and any other council permissions that may be required. Also, permission from the owner of the facility if you are not the owner of that facility. We'll need a copy of your organisation's constitution or equivalent documents, your lease or your deeds, and any details of a membership scheme that you have. For example, a sports club will almost certainly have a membership scheme, and you will need to see it to make sure it's not restrictive. If you're successful with stage 1, you'll be invited to complete the stage 2 application, and we'll need even more information from you at that stage. We'll need a copy of your last accounts. We'll need 3 comparable quotations, and there is information on our website about obtaining those quotations. The reason why we ask for 3 is simply a value for money exercise, because we will always fund up to the lowest value quotation, regardless of which contract you ultimately choose. We will base your award on the lowest quotation. We'll need an insurance document for your facility. We'll need to know where your contributing third-party payment is coming from, but we won't need to have received that yet. We'll need any evidence of other sources of funding you've either applied for or been awarded. We'll need a management and maintenance plan, management being how the facility is booked and run, and maintenance and how it's going to be, how you have a plan for upkeep, a sinking fund for roof works, etc., to make sure that your facility is sustainable in the long term. We like to have a look at a couple of photos, although we will come and take our own, and site plans and maps. If you have a a facility in the middle of nowhere, it's useful to have a map of where to go. It's also useful to have any drawings you have from your contractor regarding design work, that if you have an extension or some reordering, it's useful to have a map or a site plan rather for our funding group. Also, I've put a singular letter of support, but it's letters of support, and we're looking for really around 10 from different organisations, different people, which can include your MP, your local councillor, but not necessarily yourself, because obviously you support your own project. In terms of the funding process, once we receive your stage 2 application, we'll give you an email saying thank you very much. It will then be scored against a set of criteria that are internally known but not externally known. That scoring, in the event of an influx of applications far outstripping our available funds, will be used to knock off the lowest scoring projects, keeping a spread of projects that are higher scoring, that will normally just above the value of our quarterly contribution from Viridor. You will receive a pre-assessment visit. That will be from myself in London. And that's where I'll come and have a chat with you, and you'll be able to tell me all the things about your facility and about your project that we don't allow you to tell us in the application form. It's a really important part of the application process. And it's one that I actually really enjoy coming to and meeting you all. Once I've done that, we then have our funding group meeting, and I'll report to the funding group meeting my findings on the pre-assessment visit. And the funding group is made up of our general manager, myself, a finance officer, a grants officer, and our project liaison officer. It's an internal group. We used to have steering groups all over the country, but the costs associated with keeping those up, we felt was better used again to fund lovely projects. If you're successful of our funding group, we will then register your project with our regulator and trust. They will need to approve that project before you can start it. And once they've given us that approval, that's when we will send you our formal offer letter and funding agreement, which you need to log on to your online account and accept. I appreciate we're getting ahead of ourselves a bit here, but I just want to give you an idea of the process beyond funding as well. Once you've returned your paperwork and you've accepted the funding agreement, you'll have a month to pay your contributing third-party payment, but you will be able to start your project as soon as you've formally accepted the offer of funding. It's really important that your project does not start, i.e. you do not employ your contractor before you return your funding agreement. Our funded projects have several responsibilities to us. The first one being public relations, PR. We can't advertise ourselves. So it's a lot of our business is done by our applicants advertising Viridor credits and the Landfill Communities Fund on our behalf through our plaque, which we'll give you on our first payment, through newspaper articles, Twitter, word of mouth. It's a huge, hugely important part of getting the word of what we do out there. In terms of making payments to you, we make them on receipt of invoices for works completed. Now that can be interim invoices or one full invoice at the end of your project. We don't make any upfront payments. We will visit you when your project's completed, and we will expect updates from you every quarter to identify any issues with your project in terms of whether or not it's proceeding as we would expect. Once your project is completed, there is a 3-year compliance period, at the end of which we will again be in contact with you to ensure that your project is still delivering the outcomes that you advised us in the original application. Of note, I think, is Viridor Credit's new Jubilee Legacy Award, which actually it's available to everyone in London in that funding area, which has an increased limit of £300,000. This is a one-off award for one project in England that will receive an increased award in order to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee. There is an expression of interest form for anyone who's got an appropriate project for that award, which is on our website. And the deadline for submitting that is the 18th of March, which I appreciate isn't very long away, but it may be worth putting one in if you feel like you've got a project that would benefit from £300,000. I'm sure a few of you do. The decision date for that fund is the July board meeting. So there's a very quick turnaround between now and that date. If you have a project in mind, you could be starting that project potentially in August. And the contact details at the end there. Right, so that's the end of the presentation. Hopefully it's given you an idea of your own project, and you've been able to apply what I've said to your project to give you an idea of whether or not a stage 1 application to Viridor credits is appropriate. I'll give you a sec just to take down any details there, particularly the website if you haven't already visited it. The bottom line is our Twitter account if you want to follow us on Twitter as well. Otherwise, I think now Sarah will open it up to any questions.
Yes, of course. And can we have the slides sent out, Gareth?
Absolutely. Yeah, if I send them to you, then you could distribute to anyone, to everybody.
Yeah, great. And maybe I was thinking maybe a link to a page on the website where the deadlines are listed, because it wasn't on the slide obviously because we were talking about it. So that would be great.
Yeah, that link's on the front page, but I can certainly send it directly into it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's stop sharing if we can. Oh yes, fantastic. Thank you, Gareth. Are there any questions at all from you guys about anything that was mentioned? Just raise your electronic hand if you have any questions, or put them in the chat. Mary. Sorry, you're muted.
Hello, I'm Mary Mortimer from representing Putney Town Rowing Club. Gareth, that was really interesting, very complete. We have yesterday submitted stage 1.
Okay.
And there are some issues which your colleague Alison are picking out that we need ironing out, which is really useful. Can you just clarify again this third-party payment? I don't quite understand. Sorry, I'm not a professional fundraiser, so this is all new to me. How does that work? So if you were, say, to give us £10,000 in advance of this, once we've got we've got authorization, we would need to give you £1,000. Yeah. So,
well, I'll explain it. I think it's unique to the Landfill Communities Fund. It is a headache for everyone involved, but hopefully it can explain it in simple terms. So Viridor gives us, say, £1 million a quarter. They're a separate company, Viridor, the waste people. They'll receive 90% of the value of that award back from HMRC as a tax credit. So they give £1 million, they get £900,000 back, which leaves them £100,000 short, if you like.
Okay.
So the contributing third-party payment is a transaction between someone, a third party, so not Viridor credits and not yourselves as the rowing club, and they will give 10% of the value of your award to Viridor, bypassing Viridor credits completely and yourself. That enables Viridor to make up that 10% shortfall. So for every million, they give us £1 million, and for every £1 million, contributing third-party payments are £100,000,
okay,
which is married to the £900,000 they got from HMRC, makes it cost neutral to Viridor.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question? Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. I had more, but I'm happy not to talk about it.
Thanks.
So Gareth, basically that £1,000 will not go towards the project, but will basically go towards the shortfall that Viridor has. Yeah, okay.
But it doesn't come for the Viridor Credits Award either, because it's totally separate to Viridor Credits. So it's not like you're giving the £1,000 to Viridor Credits and we're giving you back 10 times more. It goes somewhere else. It goes, they do what they like with it, Viridor. What's really important actually is that anyone contributing that payment to you has to be explicitly aware that their money is going to the landfill operator and it won't be going on your project. That's a legal requirement from our regulator. And it can't come from legacies because the deceased can't give consent for their funds, their hard-earned money, to go to a landfill operator who's a profit-making organisation. So that's really, really important. That has to be made abundantly clear. But they unlock, if they give you £10, it unlocks £100 for your project from Viridor credits.
So the type of sources that you normally get are, I guess, local businesses or people fundraising by doing runs or other challenges.
Exactly. So it can't come from your organisation's own funds, but you can fundraise. Specifically for that payment, provided you let people know that it is a payment to a landfill operator to unlock the fund from Viridor credits. other good people to tap up are your local council, local councillors, other grant organisations as well, like Garfield Western. Some other grant organisations will pay your contributing third-party payment to Viridor on your behalf. But you know, fundraising, I think, tends to be the sort of bread and butter for contributing third-party payments.
Okay, great, thank you. Have we got any more questions, Chris?
Oh, coming, Sarah. Is that okay? Thank you, Gareth. Really, really useful. Thank you for that. It was really clear. Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the challenges we've got in Croydon is there's a number of buildings that are going to become available for work, particularly around we do youth work, community activities, kind of community hub style stuff. But obviously the challenge for us is going to be the 10-year lease arrangement. Is there scope to submit a stage 1 on the basis that we're then going to negotiate with the building owner, which is likely to be Croydon Council, in honesty? We're going to get into a negotiation process. So in other words, to work almost in tandem with you guys, because I think that we're likely to be seen more favourably if we know we're coming with something that we can offer to improve a building. But it's a bit chicken and egg. Does that kind of make sense?
It is, yeah. So what we don't allow is for our funding to be a condition for a lease being issued. The lease should be issued unconditionally, without Viridor funding kind of propping it up. But you know, certainly once you're, and I guess if you have that lease and then you're unsuccessful with Viridor credit, you're kind of lumbered with a lease for a building which you can't improve, which I understand is really difficult. There's no easy answer there really. The lease is non-negotiable. Without it, you can't go to your stage 2 application. You could probably do a stage 1, but we would invite you to stage 2, but we wouldn't accept your stage 2 application until the lease was in place.
So long story short, we need to secure that lease prior to getting to that stage. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Gareth.
And it's worth, just while we're on leases, the 10-year lease has to have no break clauses in it that are out with the control of the lessee. So if you have a 10-year lease, but the landlord can say after 3 years you're off, then that wouldn't be acceptable either. It has to be full unbroken 10 years, at least 10 years.
Gareth, can I just come in on Christopher's point here? We've got the same problem which your colleague Alison picked up this morning, that we've been negotiating with Richmond Council for some time to try and get a co-termless lease, so that we're putting together one lease of 26 years with, so we get 35 in total, but at the moment, the lease for our boatyard has got a 3-month break clause, but we're hoping to try to rectify that. So we've got to resolve that before we could expect to be considered for stage 1.
Well, certainly for stage 2. I think a stage 1 application is so basic that we probably wouldn't. I don't think we can look at your lease in stage 1. I can't quite remember what
they
said. I'm sure you've
word by word.
Yeah. I mean, if there's is it a 3-month break clause and then there's nothing after that?
Yes.
Yeah. So even
yes, but we can't the landlord won't agree to this unless we redevelop the site. We can't redevelop the site until we get the lease. So it's sort of the same as Christopher, chicken and egg.
Well, I think it's a bit unscrupulous of a landlord to ask you to redevelop the site before it gives you a lease. I think that's a little bit dodgy. And you can understand why that's something that we wouldn't touch, because we're developing a private owner's site and there's no tenure for the applicant organisation.
I mean, just to respond to that, Gareth, I think we probably fully understand the reasons behind that, because clearly it's significant investment, and you ain't going to want a situation where in a year's time suddenly we haven't got a building anymore to use their pretty new wall or whatever it is we've created. So I kind of get it, but it is difficult. Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I've got a couple of questions. Selina first, and then Tim, and then Judy.
Okay.
Sorry, Selina, you're
muted.
Yeah, Gareth, I wondered, does Viridor ever raise this issue with the London Councils Association, the LGA? Because it's an issue across London in terms of councils, leases, and the fact that, community organisations want to have these leases, and that's because they can raise funding. The world is in a very different place today. So I just wondered if that, because, if, for instance, and I don't know, if you're not able to give out a number of grants within the London region, with number of blocks being the councils in terms of their leasing agreements, is that an issue you would ever raise? I'm just asking that because clearly in Croydon, we're in a very difficult situation in terms of the voluntary sector at the moment. So, I'm just asking that question. And I know Mary in Richmond, yeah?
Yeah, it's not something we would do ourselves, but we would be happy to talk to your council if you were to say to them, look, there's an organisation that wants to invest in Croydon and the wider London area, but the stumbling block is your lease policy. What can you do about that? And I'm happy to back you up on that, but it's not something we would proactively do.
Sorry, that's something we were talking about, wasn't it, Gareth? Just before the start of the meeting, because I know the lease situation in Croydon is quite appalling. And I was wondering, and there are some groups where, they used to have a historical lease that was never renewed, and people don't want to ask even because, it might not get extended, but they're still using the building and they're still, on lease in practical terms. So what I was suggesting is maybe to go to the council, to the properties team with Gareth and say, well, we got interest from a funder, to actually invest in our community buildings. Can you, please sort out your lease situation, or kind of, do some lobbying to that happens. And I'm sure the other CVSs will be happy to do the same in Richmond and Kingston. Graham, I see Graham, she's got a question, but first we had Tim and Judy, and then I'll go to Graham.
Perfect, thank you very much. I've actually just got two questions, if I may. The first is the project I'm sort of involved with actually has sort of, I think it would fall under a heritage project. Actually, probably it's a bit more of a hybrid in terms of it's a grade 2 church where there's restoration work, but also has a sort of a shared centre underneath, which is like used for homeless provision and things like that. Presumably, does it make any particular difference which route we go down? Or is that something you would guide us on? I think we'd probably be more the heritage, but it does, as I say, have some community aspects.
Yeah, so if they're very distinct, it would be two separate projects. So if the heritage is very distinctly restoration and the community is a community centre within your church, say, they would be two separate projects. And there's nothing to stop you putting in two projects at once, or in separate subsequent quarters. We don't have a 1 year gap between projects. So whatever your priority is, and then the second one could come later.
Perfect, thank you. And then so my other question is, it's actually a sort of a project in sort of 3 separate phases that we have. Phase 1 has started, but I presume that if we just do the application either for the sort of the phase 2 or the phase 3, that would be sort of acceptable. Yeah,
that's very common. And providing that phase 3 hasn't already been contracted out, there's no financial obligation on you to carry out phase 3. Then that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
And then I've got Judy and then Graham.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Richard, not Judy, and I represent St Andrews in Ham. Gareth, a question about the criteria you apply in the selection of projects. You've given us a number of criteria to do with the funding, the letters of support, and the other things that are on the slides. But you haven't spoken about the way in which you sift different projects which come to you according to the criteria or merit that they may have. So, for example, would a project that is a straightforward repair job count as having less traction with your trustees than one which could demonstrate improved outreach, could show local value, could show increased footfall in the church, benefit the local community, or may focus on the disabled? What are the criteria within the projects that you use to judge their merits by?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say. generally speaking, we judge each project individually, so we're not against the applications that it's joined with in that quarter. Now, where obviously there is a lack of funding, then the funding group will take a call, and it's normally to do with, like you say, the number of people that benefit from that specific project. It's not a hard and fast rule. I mean, we do plenty of repair works in churches and things, you know, that's a very common project for us. In terms of the initial sift, it's done on the score that the applications get once they're submitted. And that's to do with things like how many letters of support, the value of your project, your associated fundraising, how your distance to the landfill site and your area of deprivation. But there's no single one of those that will give your project the edge over another. It's taken as a whole holistic picture, and only when the demand far outstrips the supply of funds. We try to consider every single application that comes, even if they far outstrip our means. But where there's 20 extra more projects than we can fund, we will sift some of those out. In terms of what you're saying, it really does come down to the merits on the day, where there's an excess of applications over funds, and like I said, it will be to do with who is this benefiting? Are they benefiting the most people that we can? Hopefully that's answered your question, Richard.
Yes, I'm concerned. There are a lot of issues around the context with it in which you make your awards, that you just cited. I was concerned with the content of the project and how you look at that, different aspects of the project, and judge the merits according to what they actually contain. But I think you've given me enough information there.
Okay.
Thank you, Graham. Probably not the right name either, but
no. Yes. Good morning. It's not Graham. It's Francis who's speaking, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Two Kings Boxing Club, CIC, Community Interest Company, on a recreation ground called Kingston Road Recreation Ground. We're trying to set up somebody called Ben Young in this boxing club. He trains children and teenagers, and also he's trained adult males with mental issues. So he's bringing a great benefit to the community in Norbiton, which is Kingston, because there is an awful lot of building work going on here, blocks of flats where the children and the teenagers don't have an outside space to cast off their physical activity. So that something like this is very, very important, we feel, in this community. And part of this community is deprived. My question is, I'm sorry, that's a bit of background information, but my question is, we are going to the council for a grant for the building itself on the recreation ground. And what I want to know is, if we get this grant, will that preclude us from coming to you to get a grant if we feel that we need it for this project?
No, so in fact, sort of co-fundraising is encouraged. If you can, there's a mix of funders that are investing in your project, which shows to us that there's a range of organisations that see merit within your project. It also means that we don't have to put so much of our own money in to enable you to get the outcome that you want.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Francis.
Gareth, question that comes to mind following on the question. So would they have to kind of somehow split the way they use the funding and let you know that, the council funding will be used, I don't know, for this specific renovation, while your money will be used for these other jobs, that needs to be done? So do you want to see a clear separation of works?
Yeah, exactly that. And this second stage application will allow you to list individual elements and who will be funding each one and how much those elements are. Excuse me. It's particularly important if we co-fund a project with another landfill communities fund organisation, of which there are several. So I'm not sure, this is probably a good place just to insert this here. But the Landfill Communities Fund is actually administered by several different organisations. So each major landfill operator will have an associated environmental body, of which Viridor Credits is one. So there's CETA, now Suez, has Suez Trust, FCC has FCC Environmental, BIFA has BIFA Award, and Veolia has Veolia Environmental Trust. Now we can co-fund with these organisations, and they have almost identical rules to Viridor Credits and identical application forms. But where we co-fund with these organisations, you have to delineate the different elements that we're funding. You cannot fund the same element. So if the element is new build, then we can't co-fund. But if one of them is the superstructure and one is the foundation, then we're looking, we can co-fund. And you'll be able to do that within the stage 2 application. Now, there were some questions coming through on the chat, which I've noted a couple of them. So I'll just quickly have a look at those. The first one was from Selena, which was about a sensory garden. I mean, broadly speaking, yes, a sensory garden, providing it's open to the general public and people can go around, that's fine. Now, if you have a special needs class that wants to use it separately from the general public, that's okay as well. It can be booked out. But generally, we're looking at things that can be open to the general public most of the time. So hopefully that's answered that question, but by all means, give me another message if you have any more questions about your sensory garden. Excuse me, I've never spoken so much for weeks. And someone else asked if it's possible to fund several small projects. Projects have to be site specific. So if you have 3 different churches within your parish, each one's a different project. But if you have several small projects within a single building or a single site, you can put them all into one application, providing they don't cross the community heritage biodiversity objects. So for example, if you had a village hall and there was a project for new chairs and tables, some solar panels and resurfaced car park, that can all go into one application. That doesn't need to be 3 separate applications. Again, hopefully that one's answered that brief question there. I'm just looking through some more. An extension, yep, Nikki, that's fine. We don't do new builds, but extensions are acceptable. Yeah, I've answered that one about several small projects. And oh yeah, from Clarinda, so the contributing third party, so you have 1 month to, you have as much time as you want to raise it. You could start raising the contributing third party now, but from the date of the offer letter, there's 1 month to pay it. That can be flexible. The reason why we have it as a month is because we can't pay any of your project works until the contributing third party payment is paid. So once you've accepted the funding agreement and before you've paid a contributing third party payment, you can start your project and start to have Viridor Credits funded works being completed. You could send us an invoice for those works completed, but if you haven't paid your contributing third party payment, we won't pay that invoice. So it's a way of sort of protecting our applicants from having bills piling up from your contract and not being able to draw down your funding. And I have to say that most of the time, most of the rules we have in place are to protect our applicants from things like, well, from clawback of the funds. So if you're like Chris was saying about not having a lease, and then the landlord taking your facility away, Viridor Credits will then come to you as the applicable organisation and say, well, your lovely climbing wall or whatever you've built no longer exists or is no longer available to the general public. We'll have the money back, please. So it's to protect you and the fund from ultimately losing that money again.
David, sorry, I've got David and then I've got Mary on the chat as well with another question, but I wanted to pass it on to David first. Okay, yeah.
You're muted, David, sorry. David, you're still muted.
Let me ask to unmute, so maybe that will help. Yeah.
Yes, okay. A couple of questions. First, is there a gap between making an application and failing and then putting in another application? And the other question is how much the building has to be used by the community. At the moment, we are very lucky in the building that we've got. we are letting out commercially. In a sense, it's how much of a percentage we are allowed to do that before you look and say, oh, but it's not available to the community, because it is. But we have got some long-term hires. So it's not as though anybody can come to me as the hiring manager and say, can I have it tomorrow afternoon for this particular activity? And I can say, yes, of course you can, because it may be that I've already got a hire in there. So is this something that you sort of look at it and think, well, 50% of it looks as though it's community and 50% is commercial, that's okay? Or yes, I mean, that's
okay.
My question.
So the first question was about reapplying if you're unsuccessful, yes. And the rule is you can't. And the reason for that is because we would be inundated every quarter with people reapplying for the project that was declined the first time, and all the new applications that come with it. And we'd end up with just rolling forward declined applications for forever, I presume. So we don't, once it's declined, but that doesn't stop you from applying the next quarter for a different project. So if you're declined for your PV panels, but your car park needs doing, then you can apply for your car park the next time. In terms of what you were talking about, in terms of having partly sort of private community, private commercial use, 50% and 50% public use, generally speaking, that is allowed by the scheme, but Viridor credits wouldn't fund those sorts of projects because, again, it's to protect the applicant. If you decided that actually it's more profitable for us to have 70% commercial use than 30% public use, but Viridor credits is paid for 50% of that space, 50% of the cost of the project to improve that space for the public. If we've paid for half of it, but it's no longer available for half the time, only 30% of the time, we will come back to you to repay that 20% that has been lost to the community of the value of that project. Right. That takes an awful lot of monitoring on our part, and we simply don't have the resources to monitor projects that have this proportionality, where it's half unavailable and half available to the general public. So our rule is that we just wouldn't look at it. Now, depends what those commercial activities are. If it's commercial in terms of it's a Zumba school or any other sort of generally available to the public, so those commercial ventures are available to the general public to use, that's slightly different. But I think the might be worth a one-to-one to discuss that a bit further with you, David.
Right. Okay. That's when you started, I was not encouraged, but now you have redefined commercial. I'm much more happy because yes, we have a lot of dance groups and stuff like that, where the people who are running it to make money. Yes. But nevertheless, it is definitely available to the general public to get a lot of pleasure from the activities that are being provided.
Certainly, and we'll always look at finding we always want to find some way of funding something. We don't, if there is a bit of wriggle room, we'll look for it. Yes,
and as I put in my note, I don't know whether you got it, that we were thinking of solar panels, because the cost of electricity, as we all now know, is just going up and up and up. And it will be extremely useful to be able to stick two fingers up to the electricity company and say, well, we're providing our own. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and things like air source heat pumps as well, they're big now as alternative heating sources. So yeah, that would be something we could look at. If you're looking to reduce overheads, I mean, we love that because it means that you can put more of your income into the community. So that's something that everyone can think about.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Gareth. And I put the link for booking one-to-ones in the chat, and I'll send it around later on as well with the slides. But yeah, it is there in case, David, you want to book one.
Thank you.
Okay, Mary's asked if Putney Tailoring Club is a CASC. Providing it's non-profit and you don't have a clause in your memorandums that allows you to distribute profit to shareholders and trustees, that's generally what we're looking for. So we allow councils and other organisations to apply. Charitable status is easy because it just means that you're obliged not to be profitable. But yeah, as long as you don't have any clauses in your constitution that allow you to distribute profit to other people, then you're pretty much eligible, but we'll look at that when you apply.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions? I've got one myself, in case there are no more. Okay, I'll ask you my one. It's we've got a couple of friends of different parks thinking about creating some playground, you know, equipment, facilities, areas in their parks. What kind of paperwork would they need from the council if the council is owning the land to be able to apply?
Well, they would need lease. I think in those cases, I would encourage them to ask the council to do the application, because the chances are that the council will be undertaking the procurement process on behalf of the funds off group anyway. So the council is already doing sort of, you know, the hardest part of the work. The easy bit is the application, in my opinion. You know, it's the quotes and the management of it. Now, the friends of group can still be a secondary contact for that application, and we can talk to both the council and the friends of group. But as the owner of the land, it's the council that needs to be the applicant organisation, and that's ultimately so that if they decide to build houses on it, we're going after the council as the landowner. We're not going after the friends of group to repay the funds, because they just won't have the means. And again, it's about protecting our applicants from, you know, landlords doing things that they're pulling the rug out from under them and then settling them with, you know, payback of these funds.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, oh, sorry, would there be an opportunity to book one-to-ones later on? Sorry, when we're more ready with the application. Gareth, that's for you, I guess. I'm always happy
Yeah,
to
I think so.
it.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone's found this useful, I'm happy to do something like this again with a presentation to another group of people, or yourselves again, if you really enjoyed it. And then after that, we'll have another one-to-one session with the new cohort, and you'd be able to piggyback onto that one if you wanted to.
Okay, great. And someone else is asking if we can send, you know, a copy of the application form, stage 1, I guess, application form, when we send out the slides. Is there a possibility? Is it online? How does it work?
Yeah, it's online only, so we don't have any physical copies, so it's not possible. But what I would encourage you to do, if you want to have a look at the application form, is just simply put your postcode in, go online, and you know, you don't have to submit it. You can just go through the questions and then just delete it if you wanted to. So you can have a look at it that way. I know that's a little bit, you know, double-handed, because you're having to complete it, to have a look at it, and then complete it again if you think you've got an application. But no, there is no physical copy.
Okay. Okay.
And Mary, did you have another question?
Oh, Mary did, yes.
I'm so sorry. Final question.
No?
I've applied to do a one-to-one, but I've asked whether a member of our rowing club, who's also giving his free service as architect, does it, because I am a novice and he's just got so much more experience about disability access. Is that acceptable?
I mean, you can both be on the call, I don't mind. It's
okay.
1-to-1, but it could be 1-to-2.
Thank you.
Your organisation is the one, I'm the other
Thank
one.
you.
There's one to your organisation.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And I hope we'll see loads of applications from you. Please book your one-to-one. And if you've got any further questions, just drop us a line as well. We'll be sending out slides after the meeting and the link again. So please, the other thing I promised I would do as well is make contact with Gareth, with the Croydon Council, to see, you know, at least to start lobbying about lease, you know, the lease situation. So we'll do that as well. I'll get Steve, our CEO, involved. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Have a lovely day. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much for coming. It's been very, very good. Thank you. And hopefully we'll see you on our application system soon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.